Welcome to another episode of Wednesday Toast, a podcast about comic book stuff where we talk about all kinds of comic book related stuff. And I'm very excited about this week's episode because Simon and I sit down with Jordan Blum and Patton Oswalt to talk about the comic book universe of Minor Threats. Now, if you're familiar with Simon and I, you know that we love this universe. And so this was a real exciting moment for us. Now, it's a quick interview, and I don't want to take up too much of your time, so let's get right to it.
It is Wednesday, my dudes.
Before we kick things off, I want to say that Simon and I read Minor Threats, the first volume, on a whim, and was absolutely in love with it. And one thing that we love about sort of stories outside of like the big two are stories that can end without wanting to build this giant universe. It has a satisfying ending. And for us, it was like Minor Threats gave us that. And then it was a double-edged sword because now I was like, I want to live in this universe a little bit more. I want to see what happens to these characters. I kind of take back what I said about wanting a satisfying ending.
Yeah. Well, we have good news for you. We got lots of good news for you.
Yeah.
Very happy.
How did the idea for Minor Threats come along before you guys pitched it to Dark Horse?
Well, it started as a Batman idea that I had about the Joker escaping and all the lower level criminals getting, the Bat family comes in like a ton of bricks. I kind of wanted to explore that, what it looks like for them. And then I had done some work for the majors, and you do all this work and you don't really control the IP. You really can't do anything all that radical with the storytelling as you'd like to think you could. So I was telling Jordan this idea, and he was like, well, we could, why don't we just do our own universe and pitch it to like Dark Horse or Image or something like that. And that's kind of where it went. And then during the process, Jordan used the line at one point talking to our artist, the amazing Scott Hepburn. I want the city to have like 60 years of continuity have happened to it. It has endured 60 years of continuity. And that just opened up this whole other realm of like, oh, yes, it's exactly what we're going to do now. And it was amazing. And we just we've been running ever since.
That's one of my favorite things about it. Like with the kaiju sprawled out across the city and not instantly being cleaned up like in your typical monthly comic books. You have to deal with these ongoing effects.
Well, monthly comics, they always like that state of grace. They like to go back to, here's the reset. So next month, everything is as it was. Nothing has changed. Nothing has been shaken up. No matter how crazy our individual story goes, we're not actually going to. And then that also, I'm sorry, but that goes for a lot of these massive summer crossovers where they're like, after this, the world of Marvel will never be the same, and it always is. So, like, they're not going to mess with their IP, and we wanted to be able to mess with their IP.
Yeah, like the Skrulls will invade, and then it'll be a giant crossover, like Patton's saying, and then next month it's all cleaned up, no damage. You could never tell they were there, and we kind of wanted to leave an imprint of like, yeah, no one's going to clean this up. There's no damage control. Like, people are just going to have to go to work the next day and get on their commute and have to drive around a crashed spaceship or, a dead poison ivy husk plant thing. And it's like, yeah, life goes on in these cities. And that's what we wanted the vibe to be.
And even if it gets cleaned up, there's psychic damage left over. People act and think differently after a massive event like that. So we wanted to have that be part of it too.
That seems very realistic when you think of like a capitalistic society. It's just like we're just going to push through. We're not going to think about that anymore. We're just going, and we're going to keep going, and we'll just develop on top of it.
Exactly, it's what they do.
Well, it's especially in this story. It's maybe the downtown would get cleaned up. But this is a low-income area where, there's classism, and they're not as interested in helping these people. There's a little more about, you got to keep the downtown nice for tourism and this and that, but leave the kaiju there. They're fine. They'll build low-income housing around it. And I think that's kind of the attitude of the people who live in that part of town, too, of Redport, of like, no one cares about us. They just left this stuff here, so we got to make do with what we have.
It feels like not only expanding the universe, but kind of taking different genres or tropes instead of just doing the same thing that we did in the first volume, which I found really, really refreshing, especially with the alternates. I mean, Volume 2 is going on right now, but especially with the Ultimate.
I think there's a desire to have each book have a different flavor. Even the volumes between Minor Threats. You know, we talked about the first volume having this Coen Brothers caper crime vibe, and then Volume 2 is much more of a big, sprawling sort of gangster epic. And then, you know, the alternates is us trying to do, you know, an ode to the weird early 90s Vertigo books where you take these kind of silly superheroes that have been forgotten and their lives are flipped into these mature reader comics, and what does that do to a person when they endure being rebooted? So that was kind of the gist behind that.
I love it. Yeah, I'm not a writer or anything like that, but one of my favorite things to do is like a creative practice is if I randomly have an idea for a character, it could be so simple as just a silly name. I jot it down in either my notes app or my journal, and I just have this long list of random character names. That creative practice has just made me fall in love with this series even more, because I'm like, this is that in a sense of like, these are just creative characters that you're taking and ideas and then kind of expanding them into a world. And I just wanted to say that that's one thing that I really, really appreciate about this universe that you guys have built.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on that. There is a lot of stuff from old notebooks, superhero teams, supervillain teams, superhero names and power sets that, you know, any comic book fan will write down for themselves, and we were able to kind of work them into this world. The Holiday Squad was definitely something I was going to do a long time ago in another comic and never figured out how to use it, and so we got to kind of debut them here. And you know, so that kind of idea of kind of go through your juvenilia. Sometimes that's where your rawest and realest ideas come from.
I think with that too, you know, if you have like a small idea that you can't necessarily, you may not have it completely fleshed out, but in a book like this, you can be like, okay, well, that's this character right here. It's just kind of an Easter egg thing, and that's what that is. So that's a pretty nice way to just fill that out.
I feel like our artist, Scott Hepburn, kind of laid down the gauntlet where he started just adding people in the background that we were like, who's that? And then we kind of wanted to add to it. It was like a game back and forth of like, okay, he created that insane design. Well, I'm going to start with a name. We're doing Dino Sorcerer, and he has to figure out what that looks like. And it was just passing the ball, you know, back and forth with Scott a lot.
It just seems like such a fun way to do comics, in my opinion. It just the collaboration to me is another thing that I really love. Like, you can feel the collaboration between you two and Scott Hepburn. Just the way he just pours his creativity onto the page. After rereading it for talking with you guys today and the announcement of Barfly, I just started looking at everything in the background. Like, I had already read the book more than once. So now I'm looking at not even Easter eggs. I wouldn't even call them Easter eggs, because they could just be... I know you guys had mentioned that Barfly spun out of a character that Scott had illustrated just on the side. So now I'm looking at these issues like, well, what's this character's story? And who is this? What's it, And so my brain is working like, oh, this is a massive creative undertaking. But it's like not. It's all just fun. It feels fun.
Yeah, who knows when they're going to pop up again.
Yeah. Scott has backstories for all these characters. So even when we were like, who's that? He's like, that shit eater. He had his wings ripped off by the Searcher. Like, he had figured it all out. Because I think for him to draw, he has to make sense of the world. He has to know these histories. And I think we do similar things too. We'll write backstories and biographies of these characters and maybe never touch upon them, but then we know what motivates them, who they are. And he does the same thing with locations and background characters and stuff like that. So it's such a cool part of the process to hear him talk about.
I'm kind of curious about that. Do you have like a Bible for this universe that you kind of pass back and forth, or how does that process work? We don't have
a formal Bible yet. We've realized we got to put one together because we're getting questions from some of our other collaborators of what's the background of this, when would this person meet this person. So we're starting to go back through the issues and some of the visuals as to who's where and what their status is. But
that's awesome.
We have it in our heads. We just got to get it down on paper for other people.
Yeah, probably a better place for it to live than like, what was that thing again that we said?
It's subconsciously like evolving. So it's like, oh yeah, it was that, but now it's sprawled out into this other thing just because the universe is changing so much.
Yeah, but then every time you write a new issue, you start to feel like you're living in the world, and you find connective tissue between characters' histories and stuff, so you can pull on that.
And speaking of Barfly, that is, I mean, when I saw the first announcement, I was already in love. I was like, this is great. This is exactly what I needed. How did that come about?
Well, I mean, we loved the character. We didn't know what we were going to do with it. And then Kyle Starks came to us with an amazing story, and we ran with it.
How does it work with you guys writing the main minor story sort of thread, and then you have these side books? You know, because I know Seeley worked on alternates with you guys, and then Kyle Starks is working on Barfly. So how exactly does that collaboration work?
We sort of oversee it in terms of let's keep it within the vibe and the world, but we want I don't want to give Tim Seeley notes on stuff. I want to see what he writes. Like, I don't want to guide Kyle Starks. Good Lord. So, you know, we're there more for like, here's the world, keep it within the world. But for the most part, we just let them run, you know? You
guys are essentially the Bible for them to touch base with.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, we're the Bible.
We leave it up to the writer and artist. Like, we'll if you want to co-write with us, we'll co-write. If you want to take this and run with it, we'll guide it. Like, we just want to see you guys play in this universe. And, you know, all we're always looking for is just a new perspective or a superhero story we've never seen, and something fresh. And then we really want people to just have fun and explore.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. It definitely feels fresh. And over the years, Simon and I have discussed comic books, reviewed comic books, and this is not, I wouldn't even say it was an homage. Like, obviously there are homages to characters, classic comic characters, but it just feels so fresh. I think the mixture of creativity with the characters, Scott's art, this sort of touching genres that you don't typically see in the monthly churn of comic books and events and things like that, and it just feels fun and refreshing. And I think that's why we were so taken by the story.
Oh, thanks, man. Again, as long-term comics fan, that's a big deal for us.
Yeah,
you know?
Absolutely. And I feel like people throw around the term like superhero fatigue, and it's just boring story fatigue. I think it's like you can find a new way in to use these characters. The comics have been doing it for years. I think you see this more maybe with movies these days, but like, you just show us a point of view. That's what Minor Threats was. It was like, I've never seen the D-list blue-collar jobber's point of view of what it's like to be a supervillain. And we've seen every superhero version of this, but never the villain one, and that was kind of our way in. And again, it's just exploring these worlds from different perspectives.
You know, a lot of comic creators, I feel like, are longtime comic fans, and so, you know, everyone grows up with these wanting to tell their versions of their favorite stories, and it just kind of gets wrapped up in feeling like the same thing after a while. But you guys have definitely knocked this out of the park, this universe.
Thank you so much.
Again, coming from guys who read a lot of comics, that's like, as a comedian, when the staff likes what you do, because they have to see comedy every frigging night, so that I feel like they tune it out. So if you can kind of make them wake up, that is a big deal. But I think maybe one of the advantages that Jordan and I have is we read a lot of comics, and a not a big part of our experience, but a lot of our comics experiences, why don't they look at this part? Why was that just mentioned and then we don't follow that? I got to go back to the regular third act fight. Go down that road. That was so much cooler.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I haven't thought about that. Because sometimes I find when I'm reading comic books, I feel there's a thread that maybe someone wants to take, but there is this status quo of like, we gotta end the event.
There's feeling of, the audience wants to see this, so you gotta do that. They remade the movie Shaft back in the early aughts, the Sam Jackson one.
Yeah.
And they brought in Richard Price to do like some script doctoring, because it's a very bog standard cop movie, and it's ridiculous. And then there's a subplot with Christian Bale and Jeffrey Wright. Jeffrey Wright plays a drug dealer who has something on Christian Bale, who's like a rich insider, like Wall Street guy, like rich kid basically. And he's like, he knows that he committed a murder or something. He goes, you're going to introduce my drugs into your world and help me sell this. So there's all this tension, but it's just treated as a throwaway story. And you're like, that is such a better movie inside this boring bog standard cop movie that I've seen a million times. And they visit that story a couple times. You're like, there's a better movie sitting right here that we don't get to watch. as an audience, we don't get to watch it, and it's very frustrating.
I can see that. I can see that it's sort of this status quo type thing.
Yeah.
And I think that, like you're saying, that maybe with the movies or whatever, like this fatigue that people talk about with superheroes and Star Wars and all this stuff. But as you said, I think it's less about the characters. A lot of people complain about villain development or whatever in these stories. So I think with your story, you're really going on the opposite end of that. And I'm the kind of person, like you mentioned, Patton, like I'm in the theater, it's kind of a boring story, but I'm like, man, I really wish they would have followed that, like just to see the opposite end
Let
of
it
that.
go where it's going to go. Have it go somewhere interesting. But you can feel the machinery of like, it's been 45 minutes and we have to we got to ramp up to the final shootout in the warehouse because that's what people like. And it just there's no excitement to it. There's nothing.
Well, that was, I feel like, built into Patton, the original idea that you kind of pitched me, which was like, we've seen so many Batman versus Joker stories where he takes the whole town hostage, and a lot of them are great. Like The Dark Knight's amazing, but wouldn't it be really interesting if you saw how that affected the little guys, and to see a big summer blockbuster through the perspective of the people who have nothing invested in the big showdown fight happening, the big event, and them trying to just get through the day. And I think that really opened up the story.
Yeah, I automatically think of the Michael Keaton Batman movie, The Big Parade, where, he's flying the Batwing in and Joker pulls out that giant gun. And you think about just all the people that are in the crowd, like, what does their next day look like? They go to work just traumatized. Yeah,
the trauma of that.
Yeah, I don't know why that sticks in my head every time I read some of these, like, inner dialogue with some of the characters. We talked about collaboration, and one thing that I've always wanted to pick y'all's brains about, from even reading the first volume, is how does it work when you guys are writing? Are you guys just doing sort of a ping pong where you're like, oh, I like this idea, and it kind of snowballs, or does one person take, a few pages, then you go back and forth? I just wondered how you guys worked on that.
Well, we break the whole story together, and we like to kind of blue sky together, figure out the major story points, start to outline together, and then usually we'll write a lot of it together, and every once in a while we'll pass scenes back and forth or split up and divide and conquer if we need to, but it's usually or go off and each do a pass. But the fun is just seeing if this idea excites the other person, and then we know it's worth doing.
Like I said, man, it feels like a fun way to do comics. And I don't mean fun as in like undermining or anything like that. It just seems like if I was writing comic books, I would want to do it with someone that I was on the same page with creatively, and we were genuinely just getting a kick out of creating something.
It's definitely a blast to do it this way.
Definitely, man. It's fun to read.
Yeah. We speak the same language. We reference the same comics, the same movies, and I think it's like the shorthand is so key to figuring these things out.
I know Kyle Starks brought you guys a story. Was it something that you were even interested in doing before, or is it just like...
We definitely wanted to find something to do with Barfly, with Shit Eater. We just didn't know what it was going to be, and Kyle brought us such an amazing... and genuinely heartfelt story. I can't stress that enough. You're kind of rooting for this little guy, this weird mutant henchman. It's just an amazing story. I don't want to spoil a whole lot. People will read it when it comes out, but it's pretty fantastic.
I'm really excited. I do love Kyle Starks.
We refer to it as like a coming of age henchman story, right?
Yeah.
It's like kind of
exactly what it is,
which I love.
Yeah, and that's an original idea on its own. You don't see a lot of those. Those henchmen are kind of just churned out as villains of the week. You don't even get to know them on a personal level.
Yeah,
I love it. Is there any others? Are plans to do any other characters, or I know you guys probably can't talk about too much, but
yeah, we have to kind of play things close to the vest right now, but let's just say we are very excited about stuff coming down the pike, and I'll leave it at that.
I love it.
I'd say check in around San Diego Comic-Con and you'll probably hear some new news.
Yeah, come by and say hi.
Heck yeah, that's awesome. I'm excited.
Yeah.
One thing, the difference between Lex and I is like, I love comic books. I'm more of the broader scope kind of thing. Like, I don't collect a lot of them, but I like to read. One of the things that I loved about Minor Threats is that I could read this and this could be it, and this is what I like. I don't want to collect 60 years worth of fiction to understand what's going on with the character.
Right.
So I really, really enjoyed that, but being able to continue it is great. But I'm more of a collector of action figures. I do like action figure photography and stuff like that. So I'm kind of curious, like outside of comic collecting and writing, what do y'all do? Any other kind of collecting or anything like that?
I mean, I have a pretty big library, but I don't collect per se. I used to be a big collector when I was younger of action figures and, you know, tchotchkes and stuff like that. But then I was like, I'd rather be creating the stuff that other people are collecting. So I'm kind of more of a minimalist type. You know what I mean? Although books do decorate a room, so
I like that.
Occasionally I will go to a Centipede Press or a Beehive Books and buy a really beautiful slipcase illuminated edition of something that really means something.
Yeah, I thought I was out of the toy collecting game, and then I had 2 sons, and I'm back in. Hard. I need to slow down. I keep buying things, and I'm like, he's got to have this. I kind of use them as an excuse, and then, you know, half of them just go into a big tub of toys that occasionally get played with.
Keep my fingers crossed that it doesn't get broken, so eventually it can move to my shelf. It's like, all right, you're done with this, so I'll just move it over here for me. That rarely happens, though. I usually just get Simon's hand-me-downs.
That's what's funny is like Lex has children. I don't. I'm not really all that interested in it. And so like I have all these and they're just for me. But Lex he's like, oh yeah, I'll get this for, you know, when my kids are older or whatever, you know, for now. So it's just kind of the difference between us.
Nice.
You guys are comic book fans. So is there any like inspirations throughout the industry that you guys pull from, or any sort of like big fans of old writers or anything like that you guys?
Well, obviously we were inspired by Astro City. That book had a huge influence on me. Also, the original run of Suicide Squad that Ostrander did in the 80s was a big deal. So yeah, those definitely have really stayed with me. I think that those are just brilliant books.
Mm-hmm. I feel like it came up the other day, but like fusing that with a lot of the like criminal stuff that Brubaker does, like putting the noir into Minor Threats was really important to us. So we kind of, no one does noir better than him. So we talked a lot about those comics too.
It's not something that you see often, and that blends very well, especially in the first volume of Minor Threats. We're on issue 3, I believe is about to come out of Minor Threats. And you had mentioned that it's this big crime sort of boss story. Was there thoughts of this story when you guys were writing Volume 1? Or was it sort of like, let's end Volume 1 how we want to end it, and then it sort of came about naturally?
We try not to write with a franchise in mind. We put everything on the table for each story. I think a lot of times when people are writing with the idea of, oh, this will go on for this many issues, they kind of hold back and second guess, and let's save some stuff for later. We put everything on the table and sometimes try to write ourselves into corners, which if we get another book, then it's even more surprising when you see how people come out of it, or how they get out of the predicament that we left them.
Yeah, and that's almost like another sort of creative exercise. It's like, okay, well, we wrote this story, let's go back to it and sort of see where we are as people, where we think these people are. And so you can definitely see that. Especially, I mean, I'm only 2 issues in, but you can see that.
Yes, absolutely. We are present and in the moment and excited about what is happening right now, which I think makes both the readers and in a weird way, the characters just as excited. Yeah. Because it doesn't feel like, okay, this is all being parceled out as an overall plan here. It feels like chaos.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And it definitely fits in the universe of Minor Threat.
Can I just tell you how much I appreciate that? Because I'm the kind of person that I cannot stand the withholding just to increase the runtime or anything. Whether it's issue list or runtime or whatever, it is so maddening when I'm like, okay, well, there's so much that could have been taken out of this just to get to this point.
Yeah, I mean, we've all, especially, and I don't want to badmouth anybody, but there were certain superhero TV shows where clearly they had enough material for 3 great episodes, but the streamer or network were like, we need 15, so find out a way to make this 15. And can you tell when that's going on. It is really painful, and it's one of the things that I think really hurt them. It's why stuff is the way it is right now, because they just, that happens with everything. It happened with reality shows and game shows. It happened with comedy clubs in the 80s.
I totally
Something
agree.
makes money, and then everybody jumps into the pool, and then it's there's no water in
I think that could be a really interesting way to show from the ground, right? If you have these two big heavies that are in this fight, it's like, gotta wait till the next episode and they're just standing still.
So Minor Threats is published through Dark Horse.
Yep.
Was Dark Horse approach you guys, or was there any sort of appeal of pitching it to Dark Horse?
What was that process? Did we take it to? I mean, I'd had a relationship with Dark Horse because of some stuff I did for Black Hammer, and I think he wanted to hear it. So I brought him the book that Jordan and I were working on, and they loved it, and they just ran with it. I think, isn't that how it happened, Jordan?
Yeah, I think so, and I think we were really excited. Yeah, we were excited because they have successfully launched multiple universes, with Hellboy and Black Hammer and a bunch of others that we were like, oh, they know how to do this. They're the place to kind of take something that's a little off and different and maybe help build a universe, or something new there.
Yeah, Dark Horse is one of those publishers that they may not churn out, the tons and tons of books that the other publishers do, but when they do, they really knock it out of the park. I mean, so many different books that they've put that have been successful.
And a genuine variety of viewpoints and characters. They're not like, well, if this thing works, let's do more of these. They let each person be there.
Yeah, a huge fan of that.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, I don't want to take up too much of your time. This has been a treat. We had an old podcast.
Thank you.
Where we just reviewed comic books, and we had read Minor Threats was one of the last books we read, and it was just like, man, there's so many questions, and I just want to pick their brains on why they did this. And leading up to this, I had a very successful past 2 weeks. I'm sure my wife will attest to that, which was me watching MODOK while reading Minor Threats, while reading the alternate, while reading Minor Threats 2.
Thank you.
So it's been a very, very great past 2 weeks for me, and listening to other interviews with you guys, and I'm like, oh well, these are questions that I've been asked, been wondering myself. So
great, thank you.
Yeah, I just appreciate you guys taking the time to do this, man. It really means a lot, especially.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thanks for having us on, guys.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yeah, till next time.